Thank you for joining our journey across the programmatic supply chain. With our series of webinars, we're going to explore with our guests how impression lock data is being used to make programmatic advertising more accountable, responsible, and efficient. Together with TAG, we've been working for the past 4 years with brands, agencies, DSPs, ad verification companies, SSPs, and publishers on the development of an always-on industry utility automating the reconciliation of log data across the supply chain, including an interface to identify and act on risks and opportunities in near real time. TAG is recognized for the industry standards it has established around brand safety, malware, or fraud. Last November, TAG also introduced a certification for transparency, which determines a set of transparency requirements that can get implemented by using TAG TrustNet as a transparency utility. As in other industries, transparency is becoming a necessity in programmatic advertising to comply with regulation like the Digital Markets Act in the EU, to manage risks, to optimize quality, and pay a fair price for value. Transparency is the required next major step for the industry to continue on its growth path, and it all starts with access to log data. I'm now handing it over to Tom Triscari, who will introduce our guests.
Thanks, Pascal. And welcome to Ander and Lou. So we're going to be doing this. We have no slides. This is conversational. So I wanted to get this thing kicked off with just a quick intro and quick background. So Ander, if you want to go ahead, just a quick background, your history and touching on where you touch on programmatic and digital marketing in general, and then we'll go to Lou, and then we'll kind of go through a series of questions. And for the folks out there, as we run down these webinars, we're going straight down the supply chain in the linear order that it happens in, how the money actually flows. And we're going to touch on that later because that money flow situation is actually changing. Ander will touch on that a little bit later. But when we think about money moves from advertiser to media agency to, generally speaking, trading desk or in-house team, and then goes hands-on keyboard on a DSP. DSP connects to an SSP, SSP connects to a publisher, and you've got a consumer on the other side that's getting an ad, right? So we're starting here and we're going down the series over the next few months and speaking with folks like Ander and Lou for each one of those constituencies. So Ander, over to you for a quick intro, and then to Lou, and then we'll get into it.
Thank you, Tom. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So hi, everyone, and thanks for the intro. So my name is Ander. I've been working on marketing and media since the last 15 years. I started my career in Danone in Spain. I quickly moved into Nestle and global roles, very much focused into media, audiences, data. And right now I'm heading up digital media, content and e-commerce marketing for Johnson & Johnson, or actually Kenvue, which is the consumer health new business that will spin off in a couple of months. And as Tom mentioned, we've been working together. We've also been working with Pascal, really trying to understand the power and how to deal with locked level data to increase transparency in our industry. And we will be talking about this a little bit further on later. Lou, over to you.
Thanks so much, Ander. Hi, everybody. Lou Pascalis. Nice to see everyone. So I've spent about 3 decades on the client side running large global media platforms, first for Ernst & Julio Gallo, then for American Express, and most recently at Bank of America, where I ran communication strategy, media planning, marketing data use, governance for marketing data use, and a variety of other things. And from a programmatic standpoint, and then most recently I was president and COO of a trade association at MMA Global, which was focused on the future of marketing, and we dealt with a lot of the issues we're going to be talking about today. Today, I'm running my own consultancy, AJL Advisory, working with companies in actually better understanding the space we're in and connecting it to their growth narrative. From a programmatic standpoint, very big user of programmatic at Bank of America, as you can imagine, a multi-line business with lots of different audience segments to go after. and also a highly governed environment where we were very risk averse and needed to make sure that every aspect of that supply chain was transparent, was using data in a way that matched their own consent, which oftentimes we would find it didn't, and over rotated on privacy, because at the end of the day, when you think about it, a bank is in a long-term relationship with their customers, and a short-term gain can cause long-term pain. And we always erred on the conservative side. I was surprised at how broken that ecosystem was and continues to be, and I'm looking forward to talking about that today.
Thanks, Lou, and thanks, Ander. All right, so to get this thing kicked off, as I said, so we have a series of 5 questions. We're going to deviate a little bit, and these same 5 questions are similar questions, very similar, will be asked in the subsequent webinars with the other folks down the supply chain. So, one of the big premises here is that we know from the trade press, we know going back years now that the supply chain and programmatic now around good estimates that are out there, around $50 billion is leaving DSPs, right, from the demand side. So that's a lot of money. We just saw Trade Desk numbers the other day. They came in a little bit light on the gross ad spend side, but they're seeing, $7.8 billion. And then you got Google and the rest of the players. So it's a lot of money. So as Pascal pointed out, transparency in whether it's government regulation or self-regulation, sorry, guys. Oh, sorry, 1 second.
No, we've all been there. It's usually the dog barking and the baby crying. So.
No, I'm sorry, guys. To the guests out there, I'm down with my kids down in Florida for spring break, and oh my God, I think there better not be a fire alarm in this thing. I'm never staying. I hope there's no one from Hilton on the call. So anyway. So where was I? So transparency, markets get bigger when they get transparent. We've seen this in all of industrial history, and but this industry has really lagged behind in kind of opening up, meaning the supply chain saying, look, and so I want to get into that a little bit later, but generally speaking, Ander, what is your experience with, log data? Because we know that log data is one of the keys to transparency. It's such an obvious thing. You have quite a bit of experience doing this, going back to Nestle and now at J&J. And then we'll kick it over to Lou to get his perspective on that, because the data tells the story. It doesn't tell always the whole story, but when you're dataless, you're blind, right? So Andrew, what your experience with log data and how you're using it to not only get transparency, but really the use cases around what Lou's going to get at, like how do you use these things as tools to do a better advertising job,
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think that we started experimenting with log level data back in 2018, and actually the catalyst for that was, and many of in the audience here will be aware about, the the shady articles around bid catching and index exchange, and what happened a couple of years ago. And for those of you who are not aware, in a nutshell, is really, bid catching is, in a nutshell, when a lost bid from an action is then filled in a subsequent action, right? But without the buyer knowing, right? So it's like if you go to a supermarket to buy cereals and you get, I don't know, muesli, right? Well, maybe people really love muesli, but if you go for chocolate cereals, you don't get that, right? So that was really one of the catalysts for us to start looking into log level data. Then we very quickly realized that the biggest problem around log level data is not necessarily the availability, it's really the reconciliation, right? So the reality about log level data and what we've seen is that it makes sense as every pillar within the ad tech industry is providing their own log level data. You obviously can find use cases around it, right? So obviously we discuss around, bid catching. We can also discuss about we've started to work around bidding strategies to improve our ROI, because through log level data we're able to read clearing prices that comes from the DSP, but also we can learn about actual highest bid price, second highest, the floor, the reason for the loss. You can also verify your auction dynamic, whether it's first or second, and then you bid accordingly. But the reality is that it hasn't been until more lately when we've been able to work, and again through tag TrustNet and with Fiducia and with the team in reconciling that data to actually get an end-to-end view that those use cases come to life, right? Those use cases are really focused mostly around this transparency component. And what many people just underestimate is, the complexity and the complexity behind being able to reconcile. Well, PwC and a couple of years ago already mentioned the time it took to actually just to reconcile. But the reality is there are many promises out there. My personal experience is we've been using them to mostly inform bidding strategies as a catalyst from bid catching that happened a couple of years ago. Now we're mostly focused into supply waterfall transparency and really having a clear view on how much every dollar that we invest is actually being spent across the supply chain, and being able to understand what are the actual real take rates, as we specifically know that SSPs have been reluctant to share this information, and in many cases it's not even public information. It has been removed from public statements. So this is where our experience on where we are and our journey up to now.
So I'd like to just build on what Andrew said, because I agree with everything. Most of my career was spent translating between, the specific functional areas of the media team and the executive team, trying to explain where our dollars are going, how they're being applied efficiently, what the return is, et cetera. So building on what Andrew said, there's really 4 vibrant sort of use case clusters around log level data. There are the obvious ones around measurement and attribution. There's supply path analysis, which has a lot of very specific application. For example, breakage. I'll just give you one use case. When you're looking at log level data in earnest on the client side, you can see, for example, on day one that your tags are not in place on your creative, and actually address that, versus finding out 3 months later that the tags weren't firing and not being able to go back and measure any of that. So there's that kind of early warning that you get. That's just one aspect of it. Andrew talked about many others within the auction environment and some of the strange things that happen when the second place auction becomes the first place auction. You can catch all that. The one I most focused on in my role at Bank of America was brand safety and suitability. Are we doing business with the vendors we intend to? Are we doing business with vendors we don't really know or might be identified as bad actors, right? And so it really gives you the opportunity to do what my very first boss in media taught me, who was an ex-United States Marine. He said, don't expect what you don't inspect. And I think too much has happened in this space because clients don't know the right questions to ask. And if they're not holding their partners, whether it's their agencies, their DSPs, their publishers accountable, because they're uncomfortable with the narrative or maybe don't understand the space, we get to these instances we have today where there's a lot less transparency than there are in other environments. And I have said many, many years now that programmatic is the worst thing that ever happened to advertising, and it's the best thing for the future of marketing. And I mean that because of the quality of the signal that we get, its real-time nature, and the opportunity to use context to publish something relevant to a consumer. And in a post-identity era, that context has become very valuable. So we're going to move more money into programmatic, but we need to actually put more scrutiny on programmatic. And I think that needs to come from the client side, because the money flows from the client side. And if the client asks the right questions, then I think we'll get to a more hygienic environment.
Well, Lou, that's interesting what you just said. What did you say that advertising, it was the worst thing for advertising and the best thing for marketing? Yeah, because I put it as, I always think about, and this is the thing that Andrew and I have been kind of working on together for a few years, is like, well, what's the advertising job to be done? On the most simple definition, advertising is about connecting a product with a market and knowing that you did it, right? That's one way to define it, to get the job done. But then you ask yourself, well, is programmatic good at that?
Well, so it's a couple of things. Just to get back to your initial question, advertising is about disrupting people and what they're looking to do with a message, And, it's essentially part of what used to be called the forced viewing economy, to quote Rob Norman, where I would trade my attention for access to content. And that's not always the case anymore. There's a lot of reasons I don't have to do that anymore. So what we really want to do is to move to a marketing mindset where marketing is typically more additive to the experience, more relevant to what people are doing, and has greater utility if we actually match the signal. So for me, I think what we really have an opportunity to do, and why I think programmatic is the future of marketing, is to build an ecosystem that is more responsive at a ideally deterministic level, but if we can't do that, to a cohort of people who are in a much smaller segment than we might have marketed to before. People who might be in a particular need state right now, people who might be on a journey that we can divine by what they're doing, what kind of content they're looking at programmatic. That to me is more marketing and less advertising, because we're actually part of a solution that's tailor-made for what's what's people's mindset and motivation right now. And I think we should always aspire to do that, as opposed to make them endure an ad and disrupt an experience.
Okay. Hey guys, as you can see, I think I don't know what's going on in this hotel, but hopefully this is part of the ambiance. I mean, the timing is up. I can't wait to go down to the front desk, because if this is a drill, I'm not going to be happy. It'll be over in a second. One moment.
I just have to ask, Tom, while you're dealing with this, you're in the Four Seasons in Key West. I know you are, the Waldorf Astoria rather, because I was there and they had a fire drill problem 2 years ago.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it kept going all day. We went out to the pool all day, but obviously you can't do that. So.
Oh, thanks for letting me know now. So,
Tom,
it's not very annoying, Tom.
Yeah, Tom,
it's not bad.
It's not too loud, so you can move ahead.
Okay, so it's just hard. It's like a dagger going through my brain. Maybe I should. So all right, so no, that's an interesting. I mean, how Bank of America and how you did it and how you've been thinking about it versus how Ander is using log data. I think this is really interesting, and both being really big programmatic spenders. So I want to kind of move into something about, like, we talked a little bit so far about what you kind of like, something like what this audience that's here today knows about log data. Like, what is something they don't know, Ander, for example, about log data? We know that, for example, there's been the various industry reports, et cetera, in the past, several actually. And there's a lot of information out there, but I think once you get into it, what is something they don't know about it?
I think, look, I was very surprised, and I'm going to quote, Lou, what you just mentioned from your old boss, which is don't expect what you don't inspect, right? I didn't know that log data can be manipulated, for instance. And that's something that I got to know lately. So it's really important that even when you have log data reading capabilities, you're actually able to have log data auditing capabilities, right? We've had recent use cases, for instance, and what do I mean by manipulation, right? Manipulation is, things such as changing the URL or the domain to mismatch, right? And there actually was a case of, and again, this is not because it actually happened to us, it's because I saw it happening to others. So we actually started to look into that respect. But there was a case of a major newspaper in the US who was actually using custom JavaScript to misdeclare pages and domains, which ones are submitted into header bidding auctions. So look, for me, it opened kind of a change of paradigm, right? Because I always thought that log level data, and what has been sold to us is that log level data is the truth, is the impression level truth around what happened through every actor in the supply chain, right? The reality is that there's always tricks around it. So it is really fundamental when you think about, and how do you connect this to us, right? Well, obviously you have to, or you start looking into utilizing log level data, you need to think about which capabilities you need to bring in the organization, whether internally or externally, to be able to actually tackle with these problems. So that was actually quite striking to me to learn, but good that we catch it.
I tell you, it's Ander, it's a delight to talk to you, because your experience is very similar to mine. As we found out in America starting in 2016, when there were many different versions of truth, everyone's got log level data that's got a slightly different version of truth. And one of the things that I've enjoyed working with the Fiducia team is the way that they can reconcile all those truths into a common truth, right? So you've got, every hop has its own log in programmatic. And, generally in my experience, the exchanges have the most pristine data, log level data, but it's really the reconciliation of those truths where about 85% of stuff is going to match up, but 15% of stuff is just going to be really hand salad, right? And so I think the first thing is to understand that log level data is important, but it's not easy because you've got to reconcile it across the entire, advertiser to consumer journey. There's a lot of tooling for that. I think Fiducia has built a really great tool in partnership with TrustNet. But at the end of the day, that's just the start of the journey. I think a more important thing for advertisers to understand is this log level data is yours. You are creating it, you're catalyzing it, your money is the reason it happens. But all too often, the contracts that you have in place don't call that out. And my advice on this, I'm sorry.
No, Lou, I want to touch on that actually, that last thing. Can you just talk briefly, and Andrew as well? It's weird because you go out there and clients are still under the opinion this is like 1995, where the agent is a legal agent of the client. The actual legal contract says the agency has a right. They're a principal. They're buying and selling stuff. This is their business model. Look at Publicis. Look at the earnings that just came out. This is how they make money, and they're doing what they reinvented themselves. So, but we need to understand that this is the way of the world too.
Yeah, I naively grew up in this, and I started buying media in 1989. So don't judge, I'm old. And I naively believed that I was in a fiduciary relationship with my agencies. And then I was invited by the ANA to serve in the Transparency Task Force in 2016, 2017.
Right.
I was reading redacted emails between between agencies. I never know if they were mine or others, but there were a lot of them. And vendors saying, here's the quid pro quo, and we'll credit you back in a foreign country, and then you can. So I started to realize that even though by contract it's a fiduciary relationship, it's not in reality. And so you really have to get into this when you're looking at it at the programmatic universe, and make sure you really understand the value creation that's taking place here. I was going to make another point now and I lost it. So go ahead, Andrew. I'm not sure what my other point was.
Look, I'm going to pick up on what you just said, and I'm just going to go just one level deep, because definitely that has been one of the biggest struggles, and it really struck me up. So log level data is, in a nutshell, exposing information, as we mentioned, around bid pricing, around CPMs, around floors, etc. So as it exposes, for instance, let's just take one very simple example, right? Even in some cases, even if you're the contractual owner of the relationship, in many cases, we have partners, agencies that are executing on our behalf, right? So there's a very fine line that defines who's the owner of that CPM, who's the owner of that bid strategy, right? And that contractually is very difficult to manage. And that is one of the hurdles that for us, specifically in our MSAs with our agency partners, is how do we deal with it, right? How do we deal with the fact that, is a CPM confidential information? Is a bid strategy confidential information? And who owns that information, right? And on the other side, it also naturally comes down to, because there's no contractual standardization in the industry, right? Specifically between SSPs and publishers, right? That actually, because in some cases, yes, you can share data, in some cases you don't share data, so you never know, right? So I do guess that in the future there's going to be a need for contractual standardization in terms of those terms around, the ownership and the transparency that can be shared around CPMs, around around take rates, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't have an answer for that, because we've tried to manage it in some cases. Ultimately, it all comes down to a question of liability. So, but I would like not to be a question of liability.
Yeah, and I actually thank you. You jogged my memory while you were talking. That's exactly where I was trying to go. You need to actually start to manage contractually your expectation for log level data. You're going to run into a lot of issues. In some cases, there are contracts between the publisher and someone else in the supply path where that will be not be able to be made available to you. But I've dealt with this in the past in other areas, and every year your KPI has to be increase the number of vendors that we're getting log level data from, decrease the number of vendors that we're not getting log level data from, make it a pain point for your programmatic team, make it a pain point for your agency, make your standard contract add that language. This is a Moneyball thing. That means if you haven't seen the movie, we're going to make it in a game of inches over time. But over 3 or 4 years, we're going to be able to have access to 80 to 90% of the log level data that we need to make better decisions along the lines we're talked to. But again, the client has to start this. The client, and it's painful. And in the list of things we've got to do, we might forget to say, oh, shoot, we need to include the expectation of log level data. It's a journey. Start the journey. I'll tell you a brief experience. Some of the TAG TrustNet team and I, along with the producer team, had the opportunity to attend the ANA board meeting a couple of weeks ago, where we were talking about these very issues. And it was in the context of a study that had been done that identified a lot of issues in the programmatic supply path. And at the end of the meeting, as we were kind of finishing up our remarks, the chairman of the board of the ANA, Mark Pritchard from P&G, got up and said, "Okay, we get it. We as clients need to start asking for log level data." Did everybody hear that? So these are the CMOs of some of the most important brands in the US, in North America, and in many cases globally. And now they've got this in their head that we need to start asking for log level data. That will start a drumbeat. That message will get out in the drinking water. And I think more and more publishers who want to do business, who want to grow their business with major advertisers, are going to realize that, at the end of the day, this is not the hill I want to die on, so I'll make the log level data available. And if they don't, I think that says something too. And I think we need to take that into consideration. So start asking for it. You won't get all of it, but you'll get more of it.
I've had a
Looks
little,
like Tom,
had a
looks
little
like Tom is in
logistical.
transition. Yeah.
Oh my God, this is the craziest webinar hour
You're
I've
doing
ever
a great
had in
job,
my
though. It's
life.
kind of fun.
Well, I
You either
can't
have
wait
the
to go.
world's biggest hotel room, or you're moving all over the property. I'm not sure
Yeah.
which.
Oh,
Tom, if that is your suite, I mean, I'm jealous, man. You've been working for
no. I went down to the lobby because I guess in my wing that's where they're doing of all wings. They're doing the. I guess they're doing it for the tourists. They think tourists like having a fire alarm inspection in their room. So anyway, no, but so on the bits and pieces of the log data that you get or don't get, there is quite a bit of resistance in the space from certain vendors, and they come up with all sorts of things in the supply chain. We can't give it. We don't have it. No, actually, we do have it, but we've got to charge you for it. We only have it for 30 days, and all of that. None of that's true, because if any of that were true, their underlying technologies wouldn't even work in the first place, because it all functions off of log data. So, but then you still have folks who, you go into the DSP and you see that nothing really changed the campaign setup, and they're still spending with all these players who are clearly not transparent. Why is it that it's so hard to kind of stop voting with the dollars? You know what I mean? There seems to be a lot of resistance because on the one hand, you've got this sort of thing where it's like, hey, the media budget's been cut, and once the campaigns are set up, it's like, hey, this money's got to spend by a certain date, and therefore there's this kind of a odd incentive there, and that kind of keeps perpetuating, and is resistance to making the changes, of which supply partners or who to cut off, and because they don't seem to get cut off a lot of the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say this. There are things that you do as like the head of programmatic or on a programmatic team, which drive the short-term performance, which programmatic is really well equipped to do. And then there are other things you do to, optimize your spend, to make the environment more hygienic, to really get bad actors out of your supply path. And unfortunately, the pressure is on the first area. I just need to get more yield. And oftentimes there's enough hours in a day to focus on that and not do the other things which will actually improve the quality of the supply chain, reduce the risk associated with vendors who you don't actually know or understand their business practices, et cetera. And you really need to have a separate function that sits adjacent to your programmatic team. And I was very fortunate at Bank of America to be able to stand up a brand safety and suitability team. So the brand safety and suitability team would then go into the supply path and say, we don't know this actor, this actor, this actor, and this actor. We don't have viewability here. We don't have visibility there. That was very manual, and it took a tremendous amount of time and talent. And fortunately, we were able to create an environment, a team to do that. Now with the Tag TrustNet tool, a lot of what we built as a very custom solution that our agency initially pushed back on and ultimately embraced and then sold to others. Now Tag TrustNet can do that. And so you can very instantly identify, hey, our money's going in a weird place here. Hey, we don't have the information or for example, we don't have the log level data for these vendors. So let's take them out of the supply path. So the world has moved on quite a bit, and I'm very excited about what's been built here as people start to understand what's in the Tag TrustNet tool, which is real time, always on, third party verified. You start to get to a point where now I don't have to spend 70% of my calories identifying these bad actors. I can spend 100% of my calories eliminating them from my supply path, and that's a very different dynamic, and I'm kind of excited about that future.
I totally agree with that. You said.
Andrew, what are your thoughts on that?
Say that again, Tom.
Go ahead, Andrew. No, I was going to say, I was asking you what your thoughts are on what Lou said there, because there's a lot of elements there just around the time and the cycles and the calories that Lou mentioned that have to be spent on things that have nothing to do with advertising. I mean, I can't tell you how many meetings I've been a part of, and RFPs and of every type of technology you can think of. And I'm like, no one ever talks about advertising. They just talk about all these other things, but never talk about advertising, right? And I know that that's consumed a lot of your days, both you and Andrew and others that are in your same position.
Yeah, look, Tom, I 100% agree with what you mentioned, and Lou, I definitely. Look, there's a saying in Spanish which is kind of shoemaker to your shoes, and I like to apply this to my daily business, right? Look, I've worked for big CPG companies. We are very good at some things. We are not good at other things, right? So the reality for me is, and that was mentioned as the experience in the past around the journey within log level data, the biggest struggles around reconciliations, etc. Yes, we've tried to do this ourselves, right? Yeah, it's not possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. It is possible, obviously, with a high level of effort, etc., etc. But it's really a massive transformation that implies people, tech, and process, right? I prefer to focus on the process and on the people, and I prefer to focus in what Lou mentioned. What are the actions that we take out of this? I want to be able to go to my management and tell them, success is not implementing a log level data auditing capability. Success is telling them, I've managed to improve my media CPMs or my ROI by X, Y, and Z. Right? I've managed to put in place a team that is actually reducing the amount of hours that they used to spend in trying to find out bad actors by X. That is the metrics to which we are accountable for, right? And I've been many times in many initiatives where, it's a very nice tech project, but ultimately when it comes, okay, show me the money, right? Well, you just don't spend time there, right? So ultimately, not much more to add. For me, is the experience working also with Fiducia has been great. I mean, it takes time because it's complex, right? But it would have been impossible as an effort to do it ourselves internally. And I'm more excited even about, what the future will come with.
Yeah, I want to build on one thing. I know we're running out of time. I want to build on one thing Andrew just said. Oftentimes the executive level narrative when you're reading out on your performance is different than how you manage performance, but too many marketing side clients kind of conflate the two, and you lose the audience when you start to talk about SPO, for example, to the management team.
Yeah.
But if you talk about risk mitigation, about getting out of business with vendors that you don't know, which increasingly in a regulatory environment is becoming a liability, right? You're expected to do due diligence on all of your vendors under a regulation that's come out in California and the United States. Well, that's a conversation that executives respond to. We're de-risking our media business by cleaning up our supply chain. You're going to get more investment. You're going to get more intention. And ultimately, I think it's going to drive bonuses for the individuals responsible for those verticals. So let's talk about taking risk out of the supply chain when we're talking to executives. And we can talk about optimization of investment when we're talking, to our own team. It's a different narrative, and we need to be able to walk and chew gum. We need to be able to have an executive level narrative that interests them, but also a performative narrative that holds our team accountable. And that's part of the role of a media executive.
I agree.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I want to touch on one last thing in the time we have here, which is, you guys can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So I want to touch on smart contracts, Ander, because this linear supply chain of payables and receivables, which basically means publishers aren't seeing any money for like 180 days. And I'm not here to feel sorry for publishers because I think they've put themselves in the position that they're in. So I don't want to hear like there's no in my world. There's nothing about like I want to feel sorry for the publishers because they made the choice they made. They got, but there they are. But that stuff is working itself out. But when it comes to smart contracts, that changes. That's you get a layer, and then a use case. The ultimate use case of that is smart contracts, where there's batch 24-hour reconciliation payments, and it changes that linear flow to something entirely different. And that is monumentally a different situation and a game changer when it comes to transparency. What are your thoughts on that, and what are you working on there?
So look, you touch on the passion area for me. Okay, there's two things around. And what I enjoy working with Lucia, and what I think this is the solution in the future, right? One, because it's based on blockchain. And as we mentioned at the beginning, what's the biggest issue about local level data? The biggest use case, it's trust. Blockchains are here to ensure we deliver trust through immutability of transactions and through decentralization. That's the first thing. But that solves one problem. But then coming back to what also Lou mentioned on how do you make this a use case that can also be more convenient or more compelling to, for example, our CFOs, right? And this is where, for me, smart contracts drive accountability and faster reconciliation. And there are businesses that are being built, well, media agencies, businesses have in many cases been built around just the financial gains that they can get from the difference in payment terms and receiving in between partners, in between players in the industry, right? So if we remove that layer from the industry, if we are able to automate payments and settlements, right, that is massive, right? Because it removes the whole complexity around one, the financial case of goods paid or goods received and the time it takes. It also removes the case for, because it is trusted, because it's immutable, it removes the case potentially for auditing, or it reduces the case for auditing, right? And litigations, right? So it is a massive opportunity. It is an opportunity that we're starting to work onto. Obviously, you need scale in order to get there, and you need all the players in the industry to get there, and there has to be a win for everyone. It's going to take time, but that's what's getting us excited.
Yeah, I just want to build on
that.
Yeah,
and Andrew, there's a quid pro quo there.
I just want to build on that. I was in a meeting yesterday with the CEO of a company in a new space that's actually looking at these really crazy extended payment terms. And I, as a client for 33 years, am offended that now some clients are asking for 365-day payment terms, which is ludicrous and unprecedented in any other economic model in the world. But, as new agency pitches start, you're starting to see some of that creep in. So there's a whole new business around the arbitrage of that, which will make the payment up front, collect an interest fee on that, and So we were in the meeting with the CEO of FXM yesterday, and the smart contract advantage for his business, where it completely clicks in automatically with no breakage to that payment solution. It makes the auditors happy. It makes the CFO happy. It reduces any confusion whatsoever on those terms. There's literally no air gap. So smart contracts have another advantage. If these really extended payment terms take place, you're going to have a seamless integration, if you want it, with a solution provider that will make the payment more rapidly than the terms might otherwise call for in exchange for a fee.
Yeah, and don't forget time value of money, right? $1 6 months from now is only worth about 95 cents.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And so there's a pro of the supply chain to want to participate. If I were a publisher, a content verification company, I would love tomorrow versus because it's worth more. The sooner I get the money, cash is worth more, the sooner you can get it. And so I think there's an interesting partnership here between the supply chain where they actually get it for providing the I think the rest of
We're losing you, Tom.
smart contract, yes, you get transparency. Yes, you can get SSPs here. Maybe that's a little bit better.
Pascal, I think I would need you to wrap. I'm sorry.
Now,
Yeah. Okay, sorry for these incidents.
Sorry about that, guys.
I think we've reached the end of this first webinar. Thank you very much, Ander and Lou, for participating. We'll be back in about 3 weeks. We'll send out invites, and we'll also post a video that we'll provide a link to. So thank you. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoyed it very much.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.